Hey everyone, and welcome to my High Priestess talk. I'm going to be speaking about the High Priestess card in Tarot and sort of explore a few of her facets, some of the depths. And a lot of it is going to be inspired by an Instagram live video that I made with Jessica the Story Witch. We basically wanted to compare the imagery of a few decks. She had decks, I had decks. But then we just ended up talking about the High Priestess for 1 hour because the card is absolutely fascinating. I think it's one of the cards that many people really vibe with in tarot. So a lot of tarot readers who are about intuition and about diving into the depths of their own psyche. Of course, the High Priestess card is like the premium example of all of that. So I think this community is very close to the High Priestess. It's not a troublesome card for a lot of people. That said, of course, in my opinion, every card in tarot has an encouraging aspect and a warning aspect. Some people would call it positive and negative or light and shadow, but I don't want to pigeonhole it as positive or negative. I sort of just see it as, depending on which phase in your life you're at, it may be positive for you to withdraw from the world and explore yourself, or it might be negative or unhelpful for you. So I don't think any of the aspects is legitimately or as such helpful or unhelpful or negative or positive. It always depends on the person who reads the card. And I just want to explore the sort of warning elements that the card often holds. The first aspect that I want to talk about with the High Priestess is that she is often displayed as very neutral, she has the power over her own emotions, it seems like, almost as if she's wearing a mask. She is often dressed in very ornate clothing, like an oracle who gives wisdom, just dishes out the wisdom to others and tells them what to reflect on, what the future might bring, etc. So you have this very removed, but at the same time faceless and almost emotionless aspect to the High Priestess. For example, if you take this card from the Mucha tarot, she looks very almost bored. She looks tired of being the oracle for everybody. The Torah, or in this case, it's not clear whether it's the Torah or just any scripture. The scripture is slipping from her hands. She is not really in focus. This might be like the end of her day as an oracle after she has spoken to everybody, given to everybody, inspired everybody. And I find that to be very interesting because you can see that in a lot of High Priestess cards, I find. Another example of this is in the Secret Forest tarot. She doesn't look happy at all. She has a big staff, she has a big pope hat, and it seems like she's just tired. And she's also putting the scripture aside, which essentially, of course, is what the High Priestess is all about. Putting aside the scripture, the prescribed meaning, the prescribed morality, and exploring your own depths. But this tiredness of representing to the world and being the neutral medium for divinity is very present in a lot of these High Priestess cards. And this is something that Jessica the Story Witch said that I found very interesting, because there are some decks that display the High Priestess as a very fertile woman. You know, it seems like she is creating something, sort of like the Empress, whereas in many other decks, she seems to be very sterile. She is removed from everything else. She is completely neutral. She is like a passive receptacle that just dishes out wisdom to anyone who wants it, and is sort of the filtered version of divinity, an embodiment of divinity that is easy enough for the people who come to her to consume. People who have no experience of divinity themselves and would go to an oracle like this, need to see it in a way that they can understand, because there is a certain sanctity and a certain numinous experience that you cannot understand. You cannot grasp it with words, but that is what an oracle and a lot of the time these high priestesses are expected to. They are expected to be the embodiment of that sanctity and pass on the wisdom that they are channeling from above, basically. So they are almost like a vessel that has no personality and is just staring ahead, ready to give of herself. And this is sort of where also I feel like a patriarchal aspect comes into it. And I don't want to dive into that too deeply, but she is like the embodiment of feminine receptivity, feminine darkness, the moon, the mystical feminine that nobody can quite understand. And she is that archetype, regardless of whether that is accurate or culturally acceptable or socially acceptable in nowadays time. That is the archetype that she embodies. And being looked upon, I almost have this feeling of an outside gaze. Whether it's the male gaze, I don't know, but it's definitely the outside gaze that this woman who is dressed up and who is giving wisdom to others is supposed to stand up to. She is supposed to fulfill certain expectations as the oracle, the mystical, the great woman who has all of the wisdom, who can receive everything from above, So we have not the high priestess who jumps into the water that's very often displayed behind her, but the high priestess who sits in front of it and guards it. I find it very interesting that some High Priestess cards go more into the direction of agency and into her actually using her powers for her own good, possibly, and to reclaim her own power. For example, if you look at the High Priestess card from the Game of Thrones tarot, if you're not familiar with Game of Thrones, this is Melisandre. She's a sorceress, but also a priestess. And I feel that the sorceress archetype is incredibly potent in combination with the high priestess archetype, because you have the receptivity and the reflection and the wisdom and the intuition and the depths of the high priestess, plus the ability to use all of that to her advantage, to transform, transmute, to grow in her emotions, to reach her goals, because that is what the sorceress archetype is all about. And using the divinity and the divine guidance that you receive in order to live your life fully and essentially be successful, or reach what you want to reach, whether that's spiritually or physically. All of this is sort of embodied in Melisandre as a character in Game of Thrones. So it's an archetype that the High Priestess can benefit from, I think. And it steers the whole passive, receptive, giving aspect into a new direction. And of course, Melisandre cultivates this mysticism around herself as well in order to retain her power. And she is using her gifts in a way that lets her reach her own goals and what she thinks are her God's goals. So with agency and influence, she is being the high priestess and takes a very active role, And this extreme influence can only come through if the mask is sort of broken. Of course, she retains her mysticism, as I said, but at the same time, she is not completely removed from the situation. She shows emotions and she shows what her opinion is, what she thinks is the right thing to do. And all of this is something that in her darkest aspect, the high priestess is not expected to do. She is expected to wear a mask and give neutral advice, possibly even based on a scripture or a combination of the scripture and her own divine guidance that she receives. And apart from the aspect of representing, being dressed up, giving wisdom officially in an official manner, there is also an aspect to the High Priestess that is displayed in the Fairy Lights Tarot that I really love. You have what I want to call, I'm going to use a German word here because I love it so much, Selbstversenkung. Versenken is like sinking a ship, and the Selbst, of course, is the self. So you have this self sinking. You are sinking into yourself and sinking into your own depths. And I feel like this is very prevalent in this card. She is just reading a book and she is so focused on it. And there's a star shining down on her, giving her like little inspirations or ideas. She is basically just in her own world. And I think that's a welcome change to the High Priestess cards that are always about representation and about guarding those two pillars that lead to the water of self-discovery. Rather, she is in the middle of self-discovery herself. So you kind of see behind the curtain of the High Priestess, behind the curtain of the perfect masked individual who is only a vessel for the wisdom that comes through for other people. And I know that this is, of course, something that professional tarot readers or any tarot reader who reads for other people also has to deal with. Are they only a vessel? How much of themselves can they bring into the reading? When are they overstepping boundaries? How neutral do they have to be? And all of this sort of ties into this High Priestess discussion and discourse, which is why I think the High Priestess is such an incredibly potent card for anyone who counsels and anyone who gives advice on a spiritual or a psychological basis. So overall, we have seen that the High Priestess is not just a passive receptacle and not just the embodiment of divinity that is easy to consume for anyone who comes to her for advice, but rather it is a card that reminds us to plug into our sanctity, our own numinosity, our own divine experiences and divine guidance, the ritual mindset that we can put ourselves in that has nothing to do with the gaze of others and nothing to do with representing something that we are not. It is rather about Selbstversenkung and diving deeply into all of the aspects of yourself and of the collective consciousness, possibly even. The floatiness of astral travel, being in tune with other realms, being in tune with nature, being in tune with our own psyche. All of this relates to the High Priestess card. And that is why I think it is as much an encouragement as it is a warning to just become a mask of divinity that gives to others and claims to be the messenger of whatever divine entity. Rather, you yourself are experiencing divinity, and you can imbue your words to other people with this divine guidance and with the thoughts and morals and opinions that you have, but never forget to also practice yourself. Don't just dress in pretty robes and be the Greek oracle that reads for everybody except for herself, basically. I find the High Priestess card fascinating, and these are just a few facets that I talked to Jessica the Story Witch about in our Instagram video, but I thought it was a very interesting look into how she relates to tarot readers or other people who give advice, and also our own experience of divinity and sanctity. So I feel like it's a very potent card, and I love diving so deeply into cards like this. So anyways, enjoy your day, be your best High Priestess. If you like this video, please consider subscribing or liking it. It really helps me out. And yes, I hope you have an awesome day. I'll see you next time.